I'm Erica Zavaleta, and this is Ecosystems of California. We're here on the beach at Younger Lagoon, and we've been talking about the strategies that animals use to survive in this incredibly dynamic environment where the land and the sea meet. You might think about why in the intertidal zone, a very common strategy is to be sessile as an animal, to hold on tight and stay in place as tides move up and down over you, whereas on the beach, a dominant strategy is to be mobile. We have a lot of nocturnal animals also on the beach, and some of those nocturnal animals are resident, but many of them are coming in from other ecosystems to feed on the beach at night. We have the opportunity to look at some of those animals indirectly with Tim Brown, who works here at Younger Lagoon and can tell us a little bit more about how they do that.
I'm Beth Howard. I'm the manager of Younger Lagoon Reserve, and I'm here today with Tim Brown. Tim Brown is the restoration steward of Younger Lagoon Reserve.
Hi, welcome. So today we are going to be doing some biological monitoring here on the beach. We're at Younger Lagoon Reserve, and we're going to be looking at mammals today. We're trapping and tracking mammals. It's one aspect of the biota that uses this reserve. So in order to catch mammals on the beach here at the reserve, we have small mammals and large mammals. The large mammals are a little bit harder to trap, so we use passive ways to collect data. Two of those passive ways that we use at the reserve here are camera trapping and tracks and scat. Behind me here is the beach. This beach is used for larger mammals to forage and move across the landscape. So in order to capture these tracks, what we have done on this beach behind us is rake several track pads, essentially raking a clean area on the beach so we're able to capture what has moved through since dusk and now dawn. These track pads we have designed and put them in locations where trails enter and exit the beach. Animals like us like to use path of least resistance to move around the landscape. So behind us we have several track pads that are in these locations. And why don't we go down to the beach and check out, see what we got. Behind me here we have a game trail going up the cliff that leads to about a 200-acre Brussels sprout farm and essentially the entire north coast. So it's wildlands all the way to the north. And behind us is a more urban area. So this is a pretty popular corridor for larger predatory animals to move through. So let's go check out the game trail and see if we can find any tracks. The beach is fairly difficult substrate to be able to capture tracks. Usually if it's wet, a track really stays behind. Although when it's dry, it tends to mush and you really don't get that definition of the track. So this is one of the more difficult places to track and determine what you're actually looking at. So as you can see, last night, just before sunset, we went ahead and raked this entire zone clean. That way we can determine what's been here since we raked the trap and now that we're looking at it. So we do have some tracks here, actually. They're very distinct. If you can see right here, headed this direction. Unfortunately, this is not a mammal track. This is actually a bird track that we're looking at. So as I mentioned, we're looking at all biota that use these beaches as a habitat, and one of the things we look at is insects, invertebrates. This is a pretty simple method to capture invertebrates. It's called a pitfall trap. There's different ways to do this, but what we've done is just taken a plastic cup and buried it at surface level, and insects are able to fall in there and they can't get out. These are sow bugs, basic isopods. So this works for reptiles, invertebrates, and depending on your pitfall trap determines how big of a critter you can capture in there. So on this track pad here, this is the entrance we came down, the main entrance to the beach. We have a bunch of little tracks here, very close together. A little bit hard to determine the exact footprint size. It's mostly because the sand's pretty dry right now. It's a little warmer, so there's no moisture to help set up a track. But we can use some skills to determine what they are. We know that we are on the edge of the ecotone of sand habitat with coastal scrub habitat, and these are pretty close to the vegetation. Also the gait, or the way the animals stride, we use in tracking to determine the size of an animal, and this gait is pretty small, so the stride of this animal is very short. But based on those things, the gait and the distance away from cover, it's most likely this is a small mouse, some kind of rodent, deer mouse or harvest mouse or common rodent species that we have here on the lagoon. So from the main trail that we came in on, we have another trail that's a little bit closer to the ocean, and we have this nice bluff in between. So we have two more track pads down over here, one of which is at the base of the trail that comes down to the beach, and the other one is along the bluff wall, and it's trying to capture the movement of the animal in between these two corridors. Oftentimes mammals, when they're moving in an open space, they will try to set themselves up so they have good peripheral vision as they move across the landscape. So a wall makes a nice area to where somewhere where they don't have to actually look, and they can move from one area to another and just only look out at the beach. So looks like we got a dead western gull here. It looks pretty fresh. Judging by all the kelp that's around it, it probably washed up, but you can see something got at it right here. It's pretty fresh. We've got fresh flies on it. This is the reserve. This is a wild place in an urban environment, and we have a lot going on. We have predation in action. That's why we have large predators moving through this landscape. There's birds, there's insects, there's reptiles. There's a lot going on this little beach. But based on what we have down here, coyote, bobcat, potentially, you know. We do have some scavenger species, skunk and raccoon. Could have been any one of those. All right, so it looks like we got a larger mammal here. I don't see the track in its entirety, but I do see a direction of path. It looks like going to the north, moving across the sand dunes. The sand condition is pretty dry, so you got to look at other clues here. And in this case, the gate really isn't that big, so we have a pair of tracks here, and we have another pair here. Based on that, I would say bobcat. They're also very round. Bobcat tracks tend to be more round than, say, a canine track or a canis track. We don't have domestic dogs on here. This is closed off to dogs, so the only type of canine we would have at this location would be a coyote. And this is a good example of how to determine the difference between the tracks. The bobcat track here tends to be a lot more round, whereas the dog track is a lot more ovular in shape. And probably the most obvious things to look for when distinguishing the difference between canis and feline species is cats can retract their claws. Canine species aren't able to do that, so you can almost always with a good track see those claw marks. The heel pads in dogs, you have a two-lobed bottom heel pad and a single-lobed top heel pad, whereas cats you have a three-lobed heel pad and two on the top. So something that helps if we don't have a clear track, something that really helps as an ecologist is to be able to understand the habitat type. What is going to be here? What type of animals would actually be using this beach to forage, to move through the landscape? The other thing that's really a clue with wild animals that, because oftentimes we do some of this tracking on different beaches, and to determine whether it might be a domesticated animal, say a cat or a dog, or a wild animal, a bobcat or a coyote, is wild animals tend to walk with purpose. They walk in a straight line, they're going somewhere, whereas a domesticated animal tends to wander. But you can picture a dog on the beach is chasing a ball, chasing a scent. You have a lot of wandering tracks. So that's one way we determine the difference between tracks that are a little bit harder to define on the substrate that's a little bit difficult to interpret. This one's pretty good. You can't see the paws, you can't see the heel pad, but you can see the shape. And you know, it's round shape. You can see my hand size. It's not big, but it's really not small. Something like we looked at with the mouse. That's a lot smaller. You know, based on this gait here, you know, this animal, this bobcat, was probably somewhere around 18 inches tall on its back.